Welcome to the Mixing Babies and Business podcast. I'm your host, Amy Lynch. I'm covering all things parenthood, business, flexible, and remote work with kids. Think of it as your virtual village where you can tune into stories from other business and community leaders who also happen to be parents negotiating for their needs, taking up space, and navigating the future of work. Season 6 is sponsored by the Mixing Babies and Business Changemaker program for people who want to do things differently, create an impact, and advocate for primary caregivers and their families along the way. Sign up to learn more at mixingbabiesandbusiness.com/changemaker. If you like what you hear, please subscribe, like, follow, and leave a review online. It helps other parents find the podcast. Peggy Cheyo is a parent, coach, facilitator, speaker, teacher, and home educator. With over 18 years of experience in education, training, healthcare, wellness, and personal development, Peggy specializes in supporting neurodivergent adults as they navigate work and family life. In the second mini episode, we talk about how her clients have changed, but their core feelings have remained similar, and what the assessment, diagnosis, and advocacy processes have looked like for her family. Let's get into it. You went from postpartum stage to more probably families with older children and parents working in professional environments. And you say that you're trying to help people navigating daily life, but also with any work accommodations that they need. So how have you found people's, I guess their needs have evolved over the years, the clients that you've changed to?
They haven't. It's often the same kind of problematic. Like I find with adult ADHD clients, like they feel often misunderstood. They don't feel like they have found the friends that understand what they are going through. So often there is the same dynamic of trying to find your tribe, trying to find the people who understand you, who will support you, especially in families with neurodivergence, where sometimes the struggles at school are really difficult to juggle, especially if, I don't know how it is in Canada, but in the UK, I've met and I've worked with a few families where the school was struggling with the child, so they were calling the parents to come and pick up the child several times a week. And when you're working, what do you do? And I found, that's part of the whole reason also why I wanted to continue working as flexibly as I could, because with home educating and the needs of our kids, I knew that I still needed for quite a few good years to be as available as possible and as flexible as possible. Because unfortunately, I see so many parents who are really struggling because their children are struggling in school is struggling with the child, and the parents struggling to stay in work because they're constantly being called, and everyone is struggling. Everyone ideally wants the best for the child, although sometimes the schools are so focused on their targets that they forget that. But there are some schools that genuinely would like to help, but they're a bit lost. Like they don't have the training, they don't have the staff to be able to support the different needs of the kids, and they have more and more pressure on them to meet the targets from the government. They even like attendance targets, which I don't understand. That doesn't make any sense to me, how you can put a target on attendance for children. And so now I can't remember what I was trying to answer.
No, just you were saying some problems are different, but a lot of things, the isolation, the lack of support, it's like you're fumbling in the darkness, really trying to figure out for each child and each family. I do see the same things in Canada, where we were fortunate to have teachers who were very responsive, and they said we were very proactive as parents, but a lot of it was advocating ourselves. And then it's a patchwork of speaking to the doctor, getting the referral to the pediatrician. They don't do autism diagnosis though. So then getting a psychologist, and then finding the wait list and getting on the wait list. And there's just a chain of events that needs to happen, and nobody really shares the timeline of what that will look like. We were told a lot of children are preteen to teens by the time they're assessed for a lot of things, because that's when the grades start to become impacted. And I just want to say, I'm not a medical practitioner. I don't work in the health space. If you're listening, you definitely need to speak to your family doctor if you have one, because the other problem we have right now in Canada is many people don't have a GP, and they rely on clinics that have after hours services, or they just go to the hospitals. I think NHS, it seems, is kind of a similar model to Canada's public health system. So you really have to be comfortable. If you have those entrepreneurship skills already, it can be helpful, I think, with advocating for your children, because you're used to speaking to strangers already and, voicing.
And I find that you really need, if you have a neurodivergent child, you really need to find the information for yourself, because it's very rare that you get the right information given to you, because even in GP surgeries, there are loads of GPs that still don't understand neurodiversity. So they can't really, and it's, to be fair, it's not necessarily their job. They should be able to refer on, but unfortunately they know that what they are going to refer on to, the services are overbooked and the families won't get any support. Because basically here we get referred on to the mental health service. But actually neurodiversity is not a mental health problem. It should be a completely different service. And so, for example, with my youngest, we were sent to the mental health service, CAMS, can't even remember what it stands for, but it's Mental Health for Children and Teenagers Services, to look at ADHD. Took us quite a while. By the time we were seen by someone, they say, oh no, he has sensory issues, he has anxiety, that's autism, we don't deal with it. So we had already been waiting for months. And I strongly suspect that there is both autism and ADHD. It makes sense. It didn't at first, but it makes sense now to understand he's autistic. But we had to then go on to back to the GP to be referred to another service, the pediatrician, to be able to then have a look at autism. So it took more than 2 years in total. In all of that, we didn't get any support at all. And that's what is very sad and there is a call for more money to be able to do more assessments, but it's not even where the money needs to, well, it does need to be there, but there's almost a need for a special service where parents could go and be able to book onto just, group sessions just to understand what does it mean to have sensory needs that are different. What are the things that you can start to do at home? Because, for example, for our son, a weighted blanket made a huge difference into how he could sleep. And I know for me, using an acupressure mat or some things that have a sensory input regarding touch for me is very important to regulate my nervous system. And these kind of things wouldn't cost a lot of money. It could even be webinars online that people could access. But at the moment, nobody really is reflecting on how to support the neurodivergent community. And so nobody really gives the right support. There are some charities that are peddling to try to support families behind, because lots of families are completely left. When we got the diagnosis for my autistic child, we were given a paper with a list of links that we could access to get support, and it was mostly leaflets.
Yeah.
Good thing we educated ourselves on all of it and tried to find support. But yeah, it's in a way, as you were saying, in a similar way, it's very isolating. So again, finding your own village of families who are going through the same thing to support each other makes a very, very big difference. Community always makes a big difference, but in that particular case, I think even more so.
Yeah, and what you said, like, it's public education and awareness. It's almost like we need to triage things ourselves in advance of going to the specialist so that we know at least what to ask for and how to articulate it. We've been reading a lot of library books and buying books that aren't at the library and different things. But what you mentioned there, I had a question for you that I ask a lot of people, but depending on their background, it's a different context. But what are your thoughts on creating more inclusive business spaces then for parents and their families, so that, for instance, someone like yourself who is homeschooling or home educating, you may need to bring your children with you to a workshop or a meeting. What are your thoughts on just creating more open and inclusive spaces for families?
I think it's really important. I was lucky that when mine were younger, I was at the time working mostly for a pregnancy and birth organization, and I did a lot of links with the local hospital. So I was attending a lot of meetings there. Thankfully, because the purpose was about engaging mothers, there were often meetings held in children's centers where there would be toys or things so that the young children could play. By the time mine were a little bit older, I would make sure that there would often be like some soft sitting, like bean bags or things like this. So I would make sure they had a few snacks, an iPad, and I could still be part of the meeting. And when they were younger, I would just either bring some toys or make sure there were toys around so that they were entertained. But I think if I was in the places I am now, where I do networking and things like this, and I still had my children young, I would just not go. Because often I would think, oh no, it's going to be a nightmare there. So it's a pity, because it does mean that there are lots of women who start their businesses when they're on maternity leave, and actually they have nowhere to go because they still have the children. Until their children can be in childcare, they can't really attend any of these kind of meetings, which is quite sad, because maybe it's a niche. It should be a new business.
Yeah, well, that's what I was doing with the meetups I was hosting. They were during like morning 10 a.m.
Yeah.
before nap time. Yeah, it was really just because people were self-excluding and I didn't want to do that to myself. So I was going to
Mm.
some evening events, but I was the only one there. And I was trying to also question why everything is held at these times that are not accessible for parents. Who
Mm.
is dropping the kids off? Who's picking them up? And odds are they're probably not represented in the panel or in the speakers or in the audience. Thanks again to Peggy for speaking with me about the impact of isolation and seeking out your own answers when you aren't finding adequate information or supports. The next episode will feature the final part of our conversation where we'll talk about how she invests in herself and what kind of world she hopes her kids grow up in. Check out her work at peggycheyo.com. If you enjoyed this episode, please like, subscribe, or follow and leave a review. It helps other parents around the world find the podcast. Connect with me online and access your parent-friendly entrepreneurship, flexible, and remote work resources at mixingbabiesandbusiness.com. Thanks for listening.